The first sentence in my book was, 10 years ago, I became the monster that I swore to protect my kids against. And I think that really, my publisher, again, he was like not on board with that, but I was like, I think people need to hear that, because like if you look at parenting and you research it, people try to sell you this bag of goods that's like it's sunshine and rainbows at all times, and it's not. We have these dark moments, and sometimes we have such dark moments we have no idea how to even get out of them. And I am not ashamed or afraid to share my faith journey with men, and where I'm at with it. It's a very important element of my life. I read the Bible every single morning, and I do it because simply not to check the box, but because I enjoy having like this renewed, refreshed relationship with God. I mean, there's a lot of times that when I go for a walk in the morning, I walk with him, and I'm just quiet. I don't ask for something. I just keep my ears and heart open of what he's want me to do that day. And
make your escape.
Hey, welcome back. We are glad you're here. Don't touch that dial. You are in the right place if you're looking for inspiration, motivation, encouragement. We have it for you here at Last in Line Podcast, where we are teaching guys how to not only charge the mountain and be the tip of the spear in leadership, but also to be the kickstand that props people up and empowers and encourages other leaders to be the best version of the leader within them. We are all leaders. We all have influence. And as it says in Mark 9:35, he who wants to be first will be the last of all and servant of all. That's what Last in Line Podcast is about. And I hope you walk away different than when you turned on this podcast. I hope you walk away with the revelation that you were called to lead, that you were called to have influence, and that you were called to serve. Hey, I'm excited to bring back a guest who's been on the podcast before. He's just releasing his second book next month. And I am privileged to have a crack at interviewing him before it comes out. His name is Larry Hagner from the Dad Edge podcast. He started that movement back in 2015, created the podcast, and over 900 episodes, 20 million downloads. He has created a platform that helps men sharpen their skills as husbands and fathers and men of faith, men in the house. He's been doing the podcast for 7 years nearly, interviewed 700 people in the field of parenting, mindset, patience, communication, intimacy, different things. And so we're going to dig into this book. He's got a bunch of rules, 9 or 10 rules, maybe 12 rules, but we're only going to cover a handful for leadership as a husband and a father. So I felt only relevant to bring him on Last in Line Leadership Podcast for the second time. So we're excited to have Larry Hagner. Welcome him to the podcast. Well, it's been a quick 8 months, but welcome back, Larry Hagner, to Last in Line Podcast.
Has it really been 8 months?
I think so. I looked, it was January. Yeah, it seems like forever ago.
That's actually crazy.
You've done a lot in that time. I think we both have probably done that. I know the audience probably knows who you are, no doubt. You've been doing this for 7 years and built quite a name for the podcast, the Dad Edge, and the platform. And you've got a new book coming out. We won't spoil and tell everybody exactly when it is because it's around the corner. But The Pursuit of Legendary Fatherhood, I think, is the name of it. And we're going to dive into that a little bit later. But first, I'm going to steal something from you, if you're comfortable with that.
Sure.
I know how you roll on your podcast with some of your guests, and you ask a similar question to many of them. And so I'm going to flip the script on you. So you're sitting down at Christmas dinner in 2022, coming up in about 4 months. You guys are talking about the year. I don't know, stop me if you've heard this one, because I know you know how I'm wording this. You're talking about the good things, the highlight reel of 2022. You're talking about what you loved most, and and kind of the accomplishments you had in the year. What's that conversation sound like at your dinner table at Christmas time dinner 2022?
Wow. I would put it pretty simply with some simple things and then like some big things. So probably be celebrating that my 16-year-old has his driver's license.
Mm.
So and he really wants that. He just got his permit, so now he's logging his hours and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And he had a successful sophomore first half, and that his high school band is doing really, really well. That's something that's very, very important to him. My 14-year-old is finished with his first freshman year football team. They put him in a position this year that he's never played in. He's been playing football for 5 years, ever since he was in third grade, and he's now the quarterback. He was offensive line, and now he's the quarterback. So, we're celebrating that, he embraced a whole new position and he enjoyed it and liked it and thrived in it. For my 8-year-old, right now we're dealing with a little bit of a few unknown health things that are going on in his life. Nothing alarming or nothing life threatening or anything like that, but we got some clear answers and treatment for him. And then my 6-year-old, we're celebrating that he is loving soccer, because he seems to really embrace that sport, and that he's enjoying his first year, first grade. For my wife and I would say, the things that we'd be celebrating would be that we closed out 2022 making incredible memories through experience, because we're a big experience over stuff family, that we, traveled with our kids, which we have. We went to the Smoky Mountains, we went to Colorado, went to Florida, and we made amazing memories. We fished with the kids and that kind of thing. And I would say the other thing, the final thing from a dad edge perspective, is that I launched, my book, The Pursuit of Legendary Fatherhood. As you and I were kind of riffing, the publisher that I was going with, everything in my book is done as we speak. We're currently presenting it to two, I would say, bigger publishers, so it's a blessing in disguise, but my publisher went bankrupt. And this came to a huge surprise to me and several other of his authors that were launching our books here in September. And unfortunately, he was, bankrupted, but like I said, it was a blessing in disguise. As we're talking right now, I can't mention the three publishers, but the book is in front of three publishers and we're deciding which direction we're going to go in. But I would imagine the book probably would come out and, definitely before Christmas time, and that it was launched.
Hey, that's good timing. Little stocking stuffer for the guys and for the
Right.
wives for the guys. And I love that you tell the story about your kids quite a bit, and we kind of all feel like we're part of their journey, man, whenever we're listening to your podcast. But I've heard you say it's a fraternity house that you never leave, or a fraternity party that you never leave. So that's interesting dynamic for your wife. So she's got to be a superhero in her own right. But I guess it's interesting on the podcast and the book. It feels like, or do you feel like, I guess I'll ask, a lot of your content, I mean, you almost have to come out with a book about every other year or so, just because you're talking about so much stuff. You've got books within books lined up in all of your podcast episodes, I would think. Do you derive one from the other, or does it one just kind of born out of content, or how do you get some of that inspiration?
So, a lot of it, so in the book, Pursuit of Legendary Fatherhood, so I reference the podcast quite a bit in there, meaning like the podcast guests and the lessons learned and the things that they talked about and why. And so I really took a lot of that content. I mean, you're talking at this point, gosh, it's probably well over almost 2,000 hours of content just in podcasts, and YouTube videos alone, and interviewing, amazing guests who are experts in their field, whether it's marriage, intimacy, optimizing the sex life with our wives, communication, all those things, parenting, patience, raising boys, raising girls, being a more effective leader, all those things within our family. Like what I've done is I've distilled down, I would say, that 2,000 hours and into a very digestible, easy, readable book. And really what I've done is taken the most effective things that I've learned and put them into this book. I mean, I really went all in on this book, and it's divided up into 4 parts just to make it very easy for men.
Yeah.
It's divided up in what I like to call the current state. So the things that are on the minds and hearts of men, the things that are on that we think about, how we operate, how we usually perceive the world as most men, and then just some of the things that that we can tweak just in that perception. So that's number 1.
Yeah.
Number 2 is husband, and then there's several chapters that have to do with husband, marriage. So a lot of information in there on how to communicate better with your wife, how to be an effective listener, to make her feel seen, heard, and safe, to get your needs met, which is appreciated, respected, validated, being able to elevate your connection with her, no matter how many years you've been with her. I've been with my wife, and I just celebrated 19 years yesterday. I've known her for 25. And what I can tell you is our relationship just continues to get better over time, but that's not by accident.
Yeah.
The third part is father, and there's several different chapters in that book. Even a chapter in there about how to effectively raise a strong, confident young daughter, how to raise strong, confident young men, that are going to go out and change the world. And then the final portion of the book, the final section of the book, is the 10 pillars of leadership in fatherhood, and how we can really embrace those and be effective with those.
Yeah. And that's the rule. I guess it's the term on something I looked at said rules possibly of fatherhood and being a husband and those there's like 10 rules, I think. But yeah, I want to hit those in a little bit. So for the audience, the ones who hadn't listened to maybe the one in January that we did, I know your background somewhat and a little bit of how you got into this line of work. And I guess we can learn a lot from what not to do from examples and mentors and models that we have in our lives. And you grew up, I guess, with just some examples of not the greatest dad, models, fathering models. So I guess just kind of give us a little bit flow for a second on, I guess, your mom's, some of her relationships with some of these guys that just didn't really pan out and weren't what you're going to take away mostly, I wouldn't think. I'm not going to speak for you, but also talk about kind of what triggered in you and just kind of this light went on that said, this is how I'm going to show up as a dad. Like, when did you make that declaration, and was there a defining moment there?
There was absolutely a defining moment in making the declaration to do Dad Edge, and it wasn't pretty. I wish I could say, I joke around it all the time. I wish I could say it was this beautiful epiphany, but I also embrace the fact that it came from a really dark place, because some of our biggest strengths come from our struggles. I've learned that over time as well. I think we all have. As far as how I grew up, my mom and biological father were married for, I think, 3 or 4 years. They got married as like kids, like 20, 21 years old. I came around when my parents were 25, and they got divorced like quickly after that. My dad left, and I think he kind of tried to be a part of my life. I don't know much about that, but really just went off in his own direction and got remarried, had started another family, had no idea. And not that I really cared. I was too young. And I'll never forget when I was 4, my mom brought home a man for the first time. It was a guy she was dating. And to that point, I had no idea, how fathers even came about. In fact, I think I remember, I know for a fact, I remember moms go out and find dads. That was my understanding. Like, kids just magically appeared. And then afterwards, like, sooner or later, a dad came into the picture, and moms go out and find them. So my mom started dating this guy when I was 4, and he came into our life. I'll never forget the first time I met him. The first thing I asked him when I met him after I shook his hand was, "Are you going to be my dad?" Which was really kind of funny, because I remember him stepping into my house. I remember exactly even what he was wearing. He's wearing a 3-piece suit with a double Windsor red tie, like knot, and feathered hair, his briefcase. He was a white collar data software engineer. And you ask a guy who's dating your mom that question, it tends to make the air in the room a little awkward. And we kind of laughed about it and left it at that. And then it was probably 6 to 12 months. They ended up getting married. I was in the wedding, and I was like, "Oh man, this is great." It's like a happy family. And they stayed together till I was 10. So 6 years. And what I can tell you is that there were elements about their relationship that was good, but most of the elements about their relationship were really bad. And the years that followed, year after year, their relationship just continued to deteriorate. And I can tell you, my dad just drank a lot, and I think he drank a lot because he was depressed and upset about, his life with my mom. I mean, it was pretty tense. I remember it being pretty tense. And, I think it was like I was 9 years old. He lost his job. And I was like, man, this really feels scary. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. I remember them arguing about money a lot. And I just remember this looming cloud of uncertainty. And he fell into like this pretty bad depression. And I remember him going downstairs and sleeping on the cold tile floor. And the only thing between him and the cold tile floor was our outdoor patio cushions that he had kind of made into this makeshift bed. And he was like, wearing a trench coat, to make himself warm. And I remember at 9 years old going down there, putting my hands on him, just making sure he was still alive, which was kind of very eerie feeling in my house. Like I remember walking around upstairs being like, I wonder if my dad is alive down there, and I go down there and check. And he left. They got divorced. Hadn't seen him since. I found out about 8-9 years ago he died, and it was unfortunate. He died a very lonely, poor life, and I think that marriage like really destroyed him. My mom continued to date these just really crazy guys, and it was never a fun deal for me. My mom would always start out of the gate with these relationships super strong, and she was in love every single time, and then they would kind of like dissipate and, deteriorate. And I saw a lot of alcohol. Met my father when I was 12. That was by accident. My real father. Won't go into detail just for the sake of time, but we started a relationship when I was 12, and I was overjoyed. He only lived a few miles from us, and he came to my little league games, and we hung out. And he had a 2-year-old son. He was remarried, another one on the way. Hung out for about 6 months, and then he just sort of like kind of like drifted. He kind of like hit this pattern where I didn't really see him that much or hear from him that much. Didn't really call me. And one day I just picked up the phone. I was kind of a bold kid, and I just was like, hey, what's going on? Like, I just kind of get this feeling something's wrong. And he was just like, he gave me that speech of, hey, sorry, it's me, it's not you. This is not going to work for me. And that was hard, man.
Yeah.
And my mom continued to date, got remarried again. Nightmare, guys. And then, I ended up going away to college, got my first job out of college, 30 years old, married to my wife that I'm with now, first son on the way. And I'm in a Starbucks in St. Louis, and my biological father comes walking in to get his morning coffee. And I knew exactly who he was. Mm-hmm. And to tighten up the story and the time, we ended up connecting in that coffee shop. And we have had a relationship now for 17 years. Yeah. And I've got a great relationship with my younger brothers, my younger half brothers. But it's been quite a journey, man. Yeah. And I learned a lot of what not to do, growing up. I will say this though, knowing what not to do is not enough. So I'm really speaking to your listeners right now who probably grew up in an environment like I did, which was not the best. And what I can tell you is if you're trying to navigate fatherhood with a laundry list of things of what not to do, that's like going to Lowe's or Home Depot, buying your barbecue pit, and you open up your instruction manual of how to put the thing together. And it says, here's 100 ways not to put this thing together. And the rest you're on your own. That's not good enough.
Not helpful. Yeah.
Not helpful. Dad Edge really got started. The conclusion of the story was 10 years ago. I had a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old at the time. I was your just typical, run of the mill guy. I had a really great job, really great career in medical device sales. And I remember just being short, irritated with my kids, impatient, just didn't really have a whole lot of satisfaction in life. My marriage really wasn't the greatest at the time. And had a really bad day one day, lost one of my biggest customers that was going to impact our income for the next 6 to 12 months. My 4-year-old stepped out of line, as 4-year-olds are supposed to do. It's what they're supposed to do. And I got angry, and I always swore to myself that I would never hit my kids in anger. And I did. And I spanked my son. Some people are on board with spanking. Some people aren't. It was one of those things where I was raised with a heavy hand, and I didn't want to ever do that. I didn't want to ever strike my kids out of anger. And I did. Unfortunately, I hit him hard, spanked him on the rear end hard, and he lost his balance and he fell. And when he fell, that was like, oh my God, what did I just do? And I went to go help him up. And he just had this look of absolute terror in his eyes. Like I was this monster. In fact, the back of my book, my publisher was kind of against me putting the description of the book that I did. And I was like, no, I really want to put it all out there. The first sentence in my book was, 10 years ago, I became the monster that I swore to protect my kids against. And I think that really, my publisher, again, he was like not on board with that. But I was like, I think people need to hear that, because like if you look at parenting and you research it, people try to sell you this bag of goods that's like it's sunshine and rainbows at all times, and it's not. We have these dark moments, and sometimes we have such dark moments we have no idea how to even get out of them. And that one was one for me. But that's when I shifted, and I was like, I got to learn how to do this. And that was when the journey started. I was like, I just got to be a student of this. I got to learn. And that's what the last 10 years are. That's what the past 1,000 episodes have been, for the podcast. That's what the past 7 years in our mastermind has been. It's been nothing but an educational learning platform of how we can be better fathers and leaders and husbands.
Yeah, that's good, man. It's I don't know, it's I guess good and bad at the same time, but it seems like that moment with your 4-year-old stood out to you and overshadowed all the other, I would imagine, pretty good moments of you as a dad. And we magnify those one-off situations, which obviously there are certain situations we should kind of prioritize above others. But I think you probably had many years and moments of being good, but that one scared you enough to really kind of get your attention and realize there needed to be some adjustments made. And I just, I'm curious, because what I wanted to ask you too is regarding, you hear this comparison and analogy of thermostat, thermometer, and the dad as the thermostat, right? We set the cadence, we set the tone in the home, and we should anyway. What about the guy who maybe's missed it and had a lot of those moments that you just mentioned? That was one for you, but maybe they've had years of moments like that, and they're not a bad guy, but they just don't know how to control themselves, or they're lacking some trait. What do you say to them that feels like, man, being the thermostat's out of my reach because my resume does not look great as a dad so far? Talk to the guy that thinks it's too late to make adjustments and that he can change how that temperature in the house was and how he can change it now.
Well, first of all, if you don't have that track record or you have younger kids, the best thing you can do is make sure that you are in an environment, a learning environment, whether that's, some sort of men's group. I'm a huge believer in counseling, because I look at counselors as like a guide or like a Sherpa, someone who can point you in the right direction and save you a heck of a lot of frustration. So I will tell you, if you're younger and haven't hit that yet, don't wait to hit it. That's like going 30,000 miles without an oil change and expecting your car to be okay. It's not going to happen. So you got to put in that proactive work. Right away. For the guy who thinks it's too late, like if you want to just take anything from my story, it's a story of not only a lot of crazy stuff going on, but also forgiveness. My dad was in his 50s and I was in my 30s when we reunited our relationship. Now, I could have easily been a total jackass, right? And completely like shunned my dad when he came back into my life, and maybe even punished him a little bit, right? For making the decisions that he did. But I will tell you, and I'm speaking to the men out there, your kids want you in their life, even if it feels like they don't. Like, right? Like I've got 2 teenagers right now, and sometimes you feel like they want you around and sometimes they don't. But at the heart of who they are, the core of who our kids are, your son, your daughter, they want you in their life. They're way more forgiving than you possibly can imagine. In fact, I would argue that we have a harder time forgiving ourselves than our kids have forgiving us. So what I'll tell you is, it's never, ever too late to, the biggest gap is you haven't learned the skills, right? A lot of us believe that fatherhood is a feeling, right? Like, and it should come completely and totally naturally to us. Well, that's like saying, like, if you love being a doctor, it should come naturally to you and you don't need to go to medical school. You should just know how to do it. Like that's absurd to think about. And in fact, we would never have a surgeon cut on us who hasn't been trained.
Yeah.
Right. But for some reason, that's how we go about fatherhood. We're like, oh, well, it's, it should be a part of my DNA. I should automatically, I shouldn't even need help. The thing is I call that shoulding on ourselves. We take these big steaming piles of should all over ourselves, and should will keep you from your greatness. Should will keep you from learning. Should will put you in that camp of like, oh, it's too late for me. I should have done this earlier. So I'm just going to just keep doing what I'm doing because it's just too late for me. That's just a load of crap.
Yeah.
So what I will tell you is that learn these skills. Like if anything, learn skills around even the lowest hanging fruit is communication, like how to talk to your kids, how to ask them better questions, how to connect with them. Right.
Mm-hmm.
The other skill set I would tell you to really hone is being more patient. Right. I mean, a lot of us think that patience is a feeling, and a lot of us think that patience should come naturally. It doesn't. It's a skill. Patience is emotional resiliency. It's just bottled up and sold just a little bit different.
Well, man, so given that example of you in the kitchen or wherever and you had a little temper outrage situation, like what lessons are you learning, or did you learn from that one thing? But have you continued to learn? What are some of the lessons? And hopefully we don't steal the thunder for later in the conversation when we dig into some of the rules that you talk about. But what are some of the lessons you've learned through those type of moments?
Yeah. So here's what I'll tell you. One of the biggest lessons I've learned as it relates to patience, blowing our lid, saying something that we regret, doing something that we regret, whether that's like, physically striking your kid or whatever that is. What I can tell you is when those things happen, when blowups happen, that's the fine line between I know what to do and I just crossed the threshold of I don't know what the next right thing is. So that's usually a sign that we've run out of that skill set. That's actually not a quote from me. We have this incredible coach in the Dad Edge Alliance. His name is Dr. Nick Sotelo. Dr. Nick has a PhD in psychology, and this is what he does all day, every day. And he's like, patience is actually a result. Losing your patience and losing your cool and blowing your lid is a result and that's telling you that you no longer have the skill sets. Your skill sets, that's your limit at that point. And now you need to go learn new things. So he's like, it's actually a really good telltale sign of where you're at. So, what I will tell you is that, if you're finding yourself frustrated with your kids, I would say anything external, right? Because patience is external and it's also internal. And what I mean by that is you can be irritated about something that's going on outside, right? And you can kind of lose your cool and get frustrated. But what also is happening for men is they're getting irritated with themselves. They're losing their patience with themselves because we start being like, well, God bless, shouldn't I be more patient? Like, why am I such an angry father sometimes? And all that does is add kerosene to your campfire, and that's where men really start to lose it when we have this negative self-talk. So a couple of different things that you can think about is this. Patience with your kids. If you're losing your patience with your kids, it's not your fault. And I would say it's not your fault because we don't know any better. But here's where I'll give you some tough love. Now that you're listening to this podcast, if you don't go learn the skills, well, now it is your fault, because there are resources out there that will help you hone that skill of patience.
Hey, I'm going to pause for a second with our conversation with Larry Hagner. Wanted to just let you guys know I am considering doing a Zoom live just fan call of anyone who listens to the podcast who I want to meet, who would like to meet me. I'd love to just kind of have an online Zoom party of some kind to where we can just field questions. I can tell you about maybe the vision. Some podcasts do this on a periodic basis. I just never done it, never thought about it, but it sounded like a decent idea. So I wanted to just throw this out to you. If you're interested in attending something like that, if you want to just something informal, maybe 15 or 20 minutes just to hear your questions, hear what you like, what you wish was different, things I can do better. If you're interested in that, man, just send me an email at lastinlineleadership@gmail.com or DM me at last_in_line_leadership. Just let me know if that's something you'd be interested in, and I will get your email from you, and we will include you on the Zoom invitation. So thinking about doing something to start off, maybe October, do it then, and it gives us plenty of time to build attendance. So promote it. If you like it, give me a shout. Let's get back to the great conversation with Larry Hagner from the Dad Edge podcast.
You can create space between reaction and response. And you can do that very, very well. Sometimes it's breath work. here's the other thing too. Usually a lack of patience is the expectation that life is always going to be easy, or my kids are going to always act a certain way. Like, one thing I've learned, man, is my expectations are I expect the best out of my kids, but I'm always on the ready that something is going to go awry. I'm always on the ready. For me to expect that that we're going to have a peaceful, like, I almost videoed my wife and I's 19th anniversary dinner last night at the dinner table. So I made, I got two of them are chasing each other around, the table, aggravating each other with like these plague dart guns. Then my 14-year-old gets up, throws the other one over the couch, and I'm like, this is seriously like Animal House, like redefined.
Yeah.
So you've got to anticipate those things. You got to be on the ready for them. But the other thing too is, the other gap is, okay, once they happen, now what do I do? The last thing I'll say is this, because I think TV shows and movies and stuff like that really resonate with people. Have you seen the TV show, or it's at the Netflix series? I think it's Netflix. Maybe it's not, but it's called The Offer. Have you ever heard of that?
I've heard of it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So The Offer it's 10 series. It's 10 series thing. And it's all about Al Ruddy, who produced The Godfather.
Godfather, yeah.
Yeah. And this takes place, I think it's like 1970, right? Because the movie came out in 72. So Al Ruddy produced The Godfather, and the whole series, it's fascinating. If you're a fan of The Godfather, which, by the way, if you're a man listening to this podcast, you're a fan of The Godfather. It's an all-time classic movie. But it's all about how hard that movie was actually to make. And it was because of all the challenges. Like, the mob was after this guy, Al Ruddy, the producer, threatening him not to make the movie. There's a lot of controversy around it. There was just problem after problem after problem. Like, it's a miracle that the movie The Godfather was even released, and he wasn't killed. And it turned out it was a huge success, one of the highest grossing movies of all time. But if you watch that 10 series, I would say mockumentary, and the guy who plays the main character is Miles Teller. He's Rooster in Maverick, and he is freaking fantastic in the movie. Because if you really watch the movie from a man's perspective and a patience and resilience perspective, he was the epitome of confidence and resilience. No matter what problems came his way, he was somehow, some way, very calm about it, and was able to logically think through things. And he was able to lead his team, the entire production team, to make that movie. And they always went to him with problems. And there were so many times, like, his secretary would be like, I've got a problem. He's like, a big one or a little one? And she'd be like, it's big. And he would just like look and smile and be like, are there ever little ones? Just like joke with her. But it's a beautiful example. The whole 10 series is just fascinating to see how resilient he is. And it doesn't happen by accident. You've got to learn these things.
That's cool. And to a movie reference too, that makes me think of this analogy is in A Few Good Men, when they're taking on this case that they have no business taking on, and he doesn't want to because he doesn't feel like they can win. The guidance they get before they go to the trial, before the trial starts, is whatever happens, act like you were expecting that very thing to happen, and never shift in your seat, never get frustrated, never write feverishly. They say whatever gets said, treat it like you just expected them to say that exact thing. And I think that's relevant for parenting. Just like, to your point, we got to be on roller skates a little bit, and we've got to just kind of expect that was going to be the outcome. Because I mean, I always tell my wife, like, we got to remember what we were like as teenagers. We got to remember this thing is a process. And so, from the parenting standpoint, I've had many times where I've lost patience and just kind of been like, this is not going to happen. And I just kind of spout off and lose my temper or whatever. But yeah, you got to kind of like, almost like you expected it in that moment. So kind of transition a little bit, because I mean, this is a faith podcast, and I've listened to you long enough to know that the last couple of years, your faith journey has kind of gotten more traction, right? You've got a pastor that comes on the Q&A sessions sometimes, and I love listening to him, man. But I'm curious, what led you to maybe examine your faith a little more, and and how has that been a challenge to raise kids in that light, in that environment of really focusing on their faith, especially with this cultural narrative that's out there in school systems and in society?
Such a great question. And I'm like, as you're asking me these questions, John, which by the way, you're so good at asking
I
questions.
appreciate it.
I'm really reflecting on a lot of these big, huge pivots that have happened in my life have come from like very low lows and very dark times, or times where I was served a ginormous slice of humble pie, with the whipped cream all the way to the top. So I would always say, so I was raised Catholic. And if you would have asked me probably 5 years ago, would you be Catholic in 5 years? I'd tell you no. I was searching for different avenues, like non-denominational and just different things. I was looking at not anything outside of the norm, but like just
Sure.
non-denominational and Christian. Or I was just like, I was raised Catholic. To be honest, I really didn't understand it at all. And I think that's and plus I had a really bad experience with a priest when I was in fifth grade. He physically, nothing sexual or anything like that, but physically assaulted me and verbally abused me. And I got a really bad taste in my mouth, like, being in the Catholic faith, because that's like nothing against Catholics. I'm still Catholic now and a very strong one. But that was a point that was hard. But to answer your question, it was about 3 years ago. I've had a mentor in my life. He's 10 years ahead of me. He's got older girls, but he's one of those guys that has out in business and marriage and fatherhood and faith. He's always been like one of those iconic guys, and he's here locally, and he runs like these large, amazing groups here locally, and well respected in the local community. And he's become like a mentor to me over the years. Met him in 2015. Well, in 2019, I was doing things, I really kind of got into, I think I was still trying to figure out, where's my voice in all this, right? Am I like a Garrett White? Am I like a Sean Whalen? Or am I like sort of like this more quiet person? Like where's my place in all this? And what's my personality? And what's my niche? Because if you look at all these, influencers kind of that are in my space, a lot of them like yell and scream and, and I thought to myself, wow, like in order to get and I thought it was kind of stereotypical, right? I was like, if I really want to rattle the minds and hearts of men and really get their attention and really make them stop and think, then I've got to be like crazy bold. I've got to like yell and scream, right? Like kind of like Andy Frisella, right? And when I never really got to the good degree of those guys, but I would get very direct. And to answer your question, I would use the F-bomb. I would drop language all the time, even in my posts and stuff like that. And those posts, man, they would get like a lot of engagement. Like a lot of people resonated with the message. So I got a text message from this mentor of mine. He's like, hey, man, he's like, it's been a while since we've had coffee. What do you say we go get coffee and have a chat? And I was I knew something was up with that text message. I was like, this something seems off here. Went to meet him for coffee, and we sat there and we talked for 15 minutes. And you when someone's about ready to give you a talking to, you just know. They're just and you could tell he was avoiding it, or he's prepping himself for it. So then at the end, he's like, listen, I asked you here for a reason, and here it is. He's like, I see you using language online that I don't believe is really you. It's not who you are. And I was like, what are you talking about? He's like, well, I see. And he pulled up a couple posts. He's like, dropping the F-bomb here. You're like in people's faces and that kind of thing. He's like, I don't even know if that's you. And my ego like really stepped in. And I was like, well, it is me. He goes, I don't really know if it is. And I was like, I'm sorry, I'm not following. What's your point? And he goes, well, from a faith perspective or a spiritual perspective, are you representing God? And to be honest, like the way I was brought up, there was a lot of guilt that was associated with our faith. Like my mom and my grandmother, they would really leverage like those guilt buttons, right? And I kind of like rolled my eyes and I got irritated. I was like, what are you trying to say, man? He's like, well, is that the language that you want to be using? Is that the language you'd be proud of? Is that the language that when your kids see it, you'd be proud of? And when he said that last part, that was one that wasn't on my radar. I was like, I guess not. I was like, but I'm still going to do it. Again, the ego. And he's like, I want you to think about a few things, you have a tremendous platform here. A lot of men follow you, podcast is well into the millions. He's like, what if you had more depth with God What if you had a better relationship with God and you had an opportunity to bring more men to Christ? I was like, that's not me. Like, look, and where that came from was I'm not worthy to do that because I don't even understand it myself.
Yeah.
And then he's like, well, what if you had an opportunity to understand it? And what if you had an opportunity to learn? I was like, well, I don't even know what that looks like. I was like, listen, I pick up the Bible. I don't know where to start. And sometimes I read verses. I was like, I have no clue what I just read. He goes, well, what if you understood what you were reading? I was like, I don't know, I guess whatever. And he's like, well, he goes, here's the deal, Larry. He goes, I love you. And there's nothing that you can do about it, but I'm really disappointed in you. He's like, I hope that you tweak your message. And that made me feel shamed. I felt terrible. I was pissed. And I remember going out to the parking lot and my blood was boiling because I almost thought to myself, like, who is this guy? Like, who is he to tell me like what to do, what to say, how to say it? Like, he's not my dad, like
Yeah.
the ego was big time there. I let that set in there for a couple of days and I reached back out to him. And there's a chapter in my book about this experience. And I said, I don't know what it was, but I was just like, Brian, I've thought a lot about what you said, and I think you're 100% right. I'm just not exactly sure where to start. He's like, well, I think I got something for you. And then he invited me to this 2-year mentorship. And we met every other Wednesday for 2 years. It's called Operation Timothy.
Mm-hmm.
It was this free online mentorship program where it's a Bible study, but you learn the Bible and you learn to have a relationship with God. And it gives you, if you don't understand where to start, it was an incredible place to start. And after I did that, I was like, oh my gosh, this is exactly what I needed. Like, this is exactly what I needed to deepen my faith. Well, then after I graduated that program, because it's a graduate program, my mentor asked me, same guy, he goes, it's time for you to decide now. He goes, are you going to be a reservoir or are you going to be a river? And I'm like, what are you talking about? He's like, well, you have all this knowledge now and this deep relationship with Christ, and you know how good it feels and the benefits of it, and keep it to yourself, or are you going to share it? And I was like, so long story short, I'm now taking my oldest son through it. So I'm his Paul, he's my Timothy, and I'll be taking my other son through it. And I am not ashamed or afraid to share my faith journey with men. And where I'm at with it. It's a very important element of my life. I read the Bible every single morning, and I do it because simply not to check the box, but because I enjoy having like this renewed, refreshed relationship with God. I mean, there's a lot of times that when I go for a walk in the morning, I walk with him.
Yeah.
And I'm just quiet. I don't ask for something. I just keep my ears and heart open of what he's wanting me to do that day. Yeah. And it's just very refreshing to not go at life alone like that.
And what a journey. I mean, and now you're obviously passing it on. And I wondered what challenges you face as you're, I don't guess, new to your faith really as much now because you've matured in that. But obviously we're all progressively walking this road. But, I guess, are there challenges because you have kids that are in school and football players and teenagers, and the world is just, everything's coming at them, information, social media. Is there kind of a thing in your house where you're like, look, we've set this standard. This is who we are. This is who the Hagners are. How have you insulated and galvanized the kids, the teenagers specifically, to really represent their faith, kind of like you've exemplified?
It's a great question. We have very open discussions about it. So, and we make decisions around our faith as a family. I do view myself as the spiritual leader because these conversations don't happen unless I bring them up, right? Or unless I'm willing to bring them up and talk about them. I'm also willing to bring them up, and when questions come up, I'm like, I don't know the answer to that one. So I'm very transparent with it.
Yep.
But we decided a couple of years back to go back to the Catholic faith. And I was really surprised about that because our family kind of shopped churches, I would say, for a little bit, trying to find our place and our niche. And the decision came back to over dinner one night. And I was like, hey, we've checked out these churches, and what do you guys think? Where do you guys land? I was really, really surprised to hear what even my kids had to say.
Yeah.
We found this Catholic church here that's in St. Louis. Pastor's absolutely amazing. And I thought my kids would want to be at like one of these more non-denominational, like, kind of more modern, like not traditional plays,
Right.
kind of like rock music. And it's kind of like more of a show. And all of my kids were like, I really like this Catholic church. And I'm like, are you serious? Really? Like, I was very surprised because I figure if you're a kid, like I remember being in Catholic services and it's hard, because it's kind of like the same thing
Yeah.
over and over and that kind of thing. And they were all like, no. And even my 14-year-old was like, I feel the presence of the Holy Spirit when I'm in that church. He's like, because I feel like it's calm and I feel at peace there and I feel like I can pray there. And I was like,
that's enough for me.
yeah. And my older one said that, my wife said that, and I was like, that's where we're going. And it's been good to find our home.
That's so good. Yeah, that's awesome, man. And so the fact that you bring up those conversations, I mean, I think that translates into any category of parenting. We have to we have to intentionally, proactively step in to situations and not, like you said, to the oil change of the car 35,000 miles in scenario. We're not going to wait till they bring it up, because usually it's a grease fire if they bring it to you in certain situations. So if we dig into some of the books, the book topics that you're coming out with, I got to ask you this in line with spiritual context. Are the rules ranked in any sort of importance, or because there's 10 and number 10 happens to be you're the spiritual leader of your home, but I got to think you're going more important to least important, or are they not in any sort of order? Because number 10 was spiritual leader of the home. Do we need to reverse that and put that at number 1 now, or how does that work?
Because you said it was number 10.
Yeah. But it's like top of the list. So it's like descending order. So I'm wondering, is it first on purpose, but is it number 10 on purpose? I was kind of messed up by that.
No, so I'll tell you the story behind that. So the book is not to scare men into not buying the book. Trust me, it's an easy read. But it's 85,000 words and it's 285 pages. So it's like, it's the average size of your average book, right? My goal when I wrote the book was 50,000 words. Cause I kind of thought like, well, that's kind of like the sweet spot. Men like things kind of quick to the point, but,
right.
But what I did in this book is, even though it's a bit longer, all the chapters are very short, very digestible, for the most part. What I will tell you is that in March, when I submitted the first draft to my publisher, they basically told me, they're like, hey, the one that's bankrupt, they're like, hey, it's a great book. It's a little on the short side. I was like, well, it is for men, so we want to make sure it's not overwhelming. They're like, good point. They're like, but we want you to add a little bit more meat to the marriage portion, and we want you to actually add chapters in there about raising sons separately and raising daughters separately. So I added 35,000 words in the month of May alone. 35,000 words in 30 days. It was pretty crazy, but it was the easiest writing I've ever done. I was just kind of in flow state.
Really?
And my goal, so I had 9 rules of leadership in there, and I didn't have the element of being a spiritual leader. In fact, there was a lot of fear, and even it's like that unworthiness. It's like, well, who am I to write a section on this? Like, I just learned this myself. And then I thought to myself, well, that's the exact reason why I need to write a section on this, because I just learned this myself. And maybe I can meet a guy where he's at.
Yeah.
So here's why the spiritual leader is the last part in the book. Number one, it was the last portion of the book that I wrote. But purposely what I did is I left that as the last part of the book, because I wanted the reader to have that was the last thing that he read. We always remember the first and last thing that we do. Mm-hmm. And I wanted purposely, like, I wanted the reader to end the book with that, to really think about these things. And I'll tell you, the entire section of that was, I think it was like, I don't know, 5,000 words was the last section. And it was all about like that feeling of like, man, if you feel like you're not supposed to be the spiritual leader, or you feel unworthy to do so, you're in great company, because that's exactly the way I felt, and still to some degree feel that, to this day. It's hard for us to step into that role because we feel like we're not worthy for it. And then I shared the story of how I did it, and and the uncertainty around that. But the bottom line is this: we are the spiritual leader, or we are the lack thereof the spiritual leader in our families. And we can choose to step into that role, or we can choose not to step into that role. And that entire section is, no matter where you're at in your faith journey, it's really okay. And if you feel unworthy or up to the task, and it's really okay. But what I encourage men to do is really think about that and really try to decide where do you want to land on that, and to have these even open discussions, and even to be humble about it. Because even though you're a leader, like when my kids ask me something that's biblically based, sometimes I'm like, I don't know the answer to that, but you know what, I bet Brian would, or I bet we can go figure it out, or we could ask somebody and get those answers.
Yeah. Yeah. And excuse me, I haven't read the book, obviously, but I would imagine you probably talk a lot about getting around the people that can walk with you through that journey. I mean, the Timothy program you went through obviously is a pillar of that accountability and discipleship. And so the guys that are in your, in that maybe early 2 to 5 year faith journey, I think they need to understand the importance of getting mentors around them, getting good people around them, because it's one of those things you can't do it alone. Even as a 20-year Christian, you can't do it alone. So I can't wait to read that part. And I mean, I totally makes sense as to why it would be at the end, because a lot of guys out there are kind of like me. They read the last chapter first. I don't know why I do that. I'm really weird. I kind of weird that way. But it's good that's kind of where they leave with that fire in them, and then that they have that traction. They feel that confidence to move forward. I was interested on a couple others, and then we'll let you go, because I know you got a busy day. But there was a couple others that kind of stood out to me, and obviously there's 10, but pushing your kids outside their comfort zone. I heard a podcast and I know there's a book out there that's called Coddling of the American Mind. And my guys at One Shot Podcast outlined this book, and it really stood out to me, because they talk about not preparing the road for your child, but your child for the road. And so what do you think about, or not what do you think, how do you prepare your kids for the road, not the road for your kids? Because it's a natural tendency to put this bubble around them, to buffer and insulate them, and kind of try to fight all their battles for them, prevent those scraped knees. So what advice do you have for guys that, let them scrape the knee, and let them figure out some hard lessons, and let them fail? So what do you talk about in the book in that regard?
So I just want to make sure I understand your question, like specifically. So when you say in that regard, what specifically?
So in making in discomfort, and I guess getting your kids outside their comfort zone, maybe letting them have some hard lessons and face some adversity, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So like I said, like you said, there's a whole section on that. I really believe in order to, I really believe in creating an environment where your kids, enjoy their childhood. Right. I also believe creating an environment where you have to put them in uncomfortable situations. You have to have uncomfortable conversations. You have to be willing, to be their parent, to be their friend to some degree. I'm very cautious about where that line is, because I'm always saying, I'm not your friend, I'm your dad.
Mm-hmm.
Some cases, the older my kids get, I step a little bit into that friend role, just a little bit, depending on the conversation, right? Because sometimes your kids in the teenage years, they absolutely need a dad, right? We're not taking away from that, but they also absolutely need a friend in you too sometimes. But what I will tell you is that I really enjoy putting my kids in uncomfortable situations to see how they respond, because that's how you build confidence. Is, you put these, I think David Goggins calls them the cookie jar, right? He calls it the cookie jar. Every time you do something that is uncomfortable and you achieve it and you do it, you put this cookie in your cookie jar of like resilience. Like, oh yeah, I've been there, done that. Yep. Been there, done that. Yep. Been there, done that. And if you give your kids like this super uber comfortable, cushy life, it's not, they're not going to, navigate, life very well. I'll be really honest. Last night I had a very tough conversation with my 16-year-old, and it was I put him in a very uncomfortable position. I've noticed this summer in particular was very odd. He had these goals to want to be more fit, and to improve his health. He also had goals around wanting to make a little bit of extra money. He had goals around wanting to get faster for his sprinting team. And what I saw him do over the summer months was take it pretty easy, kick up his feet quite a bit. And that was unfortunate. And since I'm working all day, my wife is the one who's usually around. She kind of like let the reins on him pretty loose and let him kind of do what he wanted to do, which he didn't get a whole lot accomplished. So last night we're sitting outside and I had this tough conversation with him. I said, hey, the summer you had this summer is not going to be the summer you have next summer. He's like, what do you mean? And I was like, well, and I said, you told me that this was the summer you want to get in shape, yet we talked many times about how you should go out for a run or do some push-ups or work out. You didn't do that. I was like, you want to make extra money. Mom made you a whole list of things you could do around the house and the money that was associated with that you could make. You didn't do any of it. And, I see you saying things that you want out of life, but I didn't see you chase hardly any of it this summer. And I was like, so next summer, the big word that we're going to focus on is earn. And I said, I saw you really kind of escape on your phone quite a bit. I saw you escape in like Netflix quite a bit. And you're going to have to earn those things next year. Next summer, it's going to be, you're going to wake up at a good time. You're going to get things accomplished. And then depending on what you get accomplished, then you can earn your phone for the day and earn your friend time for the day. Yeah. And here's the funny thing. And he was very honest. And this is where I think you can create an environment. And there's a whole section on this too, of psychological safety, where your kids will be very honest with you and they'll tell you everything. And my son looked at me, he goes, well, I want to tell you something. And I hope you don't get mad at me. I was like, I won't get mad. Just tell me, just be honest. He goes, I thought about doing all those things. And at the end of the day, I didn't feel like doing it. I was like, you didn't feel like doing it. So then we had a very deep conversation around it's action over feelings. It's determinate. He was like, well, I wasn't motivated. I was like, it's determination over motivation. I was like, do you realize that if you waited for when you were motivated to do something, it would probably never come. You have to do things in life that are hard despite the feeling of not wanting to do them. That's the only way you move the needle in your life. If you're not willing to do those things, well, it's not going to happen for you.
And not just kids, by the way, for those listening.
Yeah, for grown. Yeah. And funny thing was, and I'll end the story here. I showed him this live video that I did, and it was just a couple weeks before. It was just a couple weeks ago. I streamed this in our mastermind group. I was sitting outside of my gym in the car, and there wasn't one part of me that wanted to go in. I had pulled something in my neck. I kind of had a rough day. It was 2:30 on a Friday. The weather was nice. I was just kind of joking, me like I could just start happy hour now if I really wanted to.
Right.
But I knew that going into that gym, I would be in a better headspace when I left, despite every single part of me did not want to go in there. There wasn't one part of me that wanted to go in there. And it really broke down though to this. It wasn't necessarily getting in a workout. It was, I didn't want to betray the trust in myself, because just like David Goggins says, like, you do something hard, you put a cookie in the cookie jar, that cookies can be taken out.
Yeah.
They have an empty jar, and you do that by betraying your own trust, by letting yourself off the hook, by giving into your feelings and not trusting the process. So I was like, I'm going to go in there. And I even said in the video, I was like, I'm going to go in there and have a mediocre workout. That's my expectation. I'm just going to go in there. I'm going to move my body for 60 minutes. That's it. And I did. And I showed him a video after, what I felt like leaving, and it felt renewed, refreshed, and ready for the day. So it was a lesson, it was one of those things. To answer your question, I put my kids in tough situations to put cookies in cookie jars. And I also have very uncomfortable conversations with them from time to time to call them out.
Yeah. And sort of to parlay into that question, you bring up another rule that is talking about questions and asking the right questions. So in those situations where it's going to be uncomfortable, the question could be everything. And you and I know, I'm in medical sales too. I was in device for a little bit. We know sales 101. The best question is the ingredients, in my opinion. I'm going to let you expand on it, but curiosity and empathy can go a long way in the way you phrase an open-ended question. And tell me if you agree with those two things, or do you have just this sort of secret sauce in a good question for kids, specifically for kids? Like what makes you a good question asker when it comes to those hard ones?
So I actually have a course called Creating an Extraordinary Marriage, where I teach men 9 skill sets within communication. 4 of them are exactly right in line with what you just said. So like, for instance, you can have a good conversation or not so good conversation depending on the questions that you ask. So if I ask my kids, hey, how was school today?
Yeah.
I'm not going to get a good answer. I'm going to get, like, my 14-year-old, his favorite word was, it was boring. I couldn't wait for it to end, and what I'll tell you is I don't do those questions. So you've got to have a foundation of really good questions. So, like, for instance, I ask him, what was the best part of your day today? Because that way he has to story tell. He can't just be like, it was boring, right? And I help guide him into gratitude. But there are ways that we can, be an empathetic listener and be our go-to for our kids. So one of them is being able to not necessarily, you don't have to solve your kids' problems. In fact, I would tell you that the more questions you ask to lead them to solve their own, the better off you're going to be. So I like to use a skill set that we call using emotional labels or validation, right? So wherever your kids are feeling, being able to label what it is that they probably feel. So instead of, if my kid comes home and I'm like, hey, tell me about the best part of your day, and they're like, man, I really didn't have a great day. It was really tough today. Oh, well, sounds like that could be overwhelming. Tell me more about that. The overwhelming is me identifying. I'm seeing them. I'm hearing them, like, hey, I see you're overwhelmed. That makes them feel seen, heard, safe, right? The other thing too is mirroring. I hate using the word why. The word why doesn't land well psychologically for somebody. If I say, hey, why are you wearing that hat? John, why are you wearing that hat? If it doesn't feel nearly as good as, John, cool hat, tell me about that hat. You're going to tell me the why behind the hat, but you're going to have different feelings associated with how I prompted you to tell me about the hat.
Yeah, it prompts defensiveness really when you phrase it as why.
It does. And then voice tone is another thing. This is something we overlook, but you can completely ignite and create psychological safety, or you can decimate it just by voice tone alone using the exact same words. So, like, if I come home and if I ask my wife that question, like, hey, tell me about the best part of your day, and she's like, oh my God, today was horrible. Like, I had a really bad day. And if I be like, you had a really bad day, or if I say, you had a really bad day, one of them incites like condescension and like, who are you to have a bad day? And the other one is like, well, tell me more about that. I can tell you're overwhelmed. And then the final one, like I said, is generative questions. So three, like I said, validation is one, mirroring is one, voice tone is one, but the generative questions ones, that's where like these conversations kind of start and stop, right? If you're asking really poor questions, like, how was your day? What's for dinner? How'd you sleep? You're going to get really poor questions. But if you ask something with your kids, like the question that you asked, like, hey, if we were to fast forward to the end of 2022 and you were telling me that you were telling me all the things that you were excited about, that you were celebrating, what would you be telling me that hasn't happened yet? My kid has to really think about that. And when he's telling me those things, he feels incredibly connected to me, because it's like, wow, my dad's really interested in me.
Yep.
So that's where those four skill sets alone will set the bar incredibly differently for you.
Those are good, man. Those are awesome. And I will tell the audience too, like, a lot of what you're saying, you've really over the years have kind of gained a PhD on the streets, if you will. I mean, the people that you've interviewed and the experts that you're not just spouting off things opinions or things you think or things you've noticed from afar. Like, these are things that experts have told you. There's data behind it. You do your research, you live it. So, I mean, all that encompassed in this PhD on the street that I called it. I mean, it makes your testimony, it makes you a credible source of information. So I appreciate that, man, because you've done the work on the front end, and I can't wait for this book to come out, man. Talk about where to find, obviously, your website, kind of some of the masterminds, maybe some of the resources that are already out there, and then maybe give us a little speculation on when we get the new book.
Yeah. So the book is, like I said, it's totally done. We're just like waiting to see which publisher we're going with. It's called The Pursuit of Legendary Fatherhood. It's break old patterns, create the extraordinary marriage that you truly want, and the legacy that you're proud of. And the original date was September 6th. That's not going to happen anymore. I would say look for it. I would say look for pre-order on Amazon at any minute now, because as soon as we hit the publishing button, as soon as we ink the contract with the publisher, they're going to put it on Amazon, I'm sure, for pre-orders. Cool. I know once we launch it, it's going to be in every stores. You can find it just about anywhere. But I think it'll come out. You never know, October, maybe November, hopefully before Christmas time.
Yeah. And you've got some other stuff too out there, I think, don't you? I mean, you've got another book, like you said, you've got some classes. Where do we find those?
Yeah, so I actually I'll give you guys a coupon code that's is specifically for your listeners. Yeah, I've got another book called The Dad's Edge. I wrote that 7 years ago. I would say that's probably the lowest hanging, easiest. It's like basic knowledge for dads. Very easy to read. It's only 27,000 words. You'll probably get through it in an hour and a half. I've got a couple of children's books out there. Daddy Will Always Love You and Protect You. It's just a great book to read to your little kids at night, talking about like just some of the things that we go through during the day and how we operate as dads, but how we love our kids no matter what. And it's a great message to read to your kids. As far as courses go, I have Creating More Patience. That's a 45-minute course. It's very, very easy. You can find that on the website. You just under courses in the nav bar. And then the other course that I have is Creating Extraordinary Marriage. And that's where I teach you. I briefly went over 4 skill sets, but I teach you 9 as it relates to deepening the communication between your wife, creating more intimacy and depth, having more sex and all the whole 9 yards, and basically feeling like you're dating your wife all over again, because that type of marriage doesn't happen, by accident. But you can find those. Awesome. What I'll do is we'll create a coupon code just for your listeners. We'll give your listeners half off those courses. So we'll use the coupon code line. So Last in Line is your podcast. Okay. We use the word line, LINE, for 50% off those courses. If you want to check those out, you're more than welcome to.
Appreciate that, man. That's generous. We appreciate it. I know we can all learn a lot from those. Man, I appreciate you just being about it, not just talking about living legendary. I know that's your tagline, and I know you're doing it every day, and I would think self-proclaimed, still learning some things, but so are all of us. But it's been a pleasure having you back, man. It's been an honor to hear about your journey, the lessons you've learned, the new book. I'm excited. Folks, you're gonna have to go out and get it. Make a perfect little, fall pre-Thanksgiving present, pre-Christmas present. So don't wait till Christmas though. Go out and get it immediately. Get on the pre-order list because they're gonna get sold out, I'm sure. So he's been Larry Hagner. We've been Last in Line. Be blessed. Make your escape.